Good morning, everyone. I'd like to talk today about our Gospel reading because it has some important things to say about following Jesus. It also shows how some people can get things really wrong. We start with James and John, who are taking Jesus aside for a quiet word about their future. The group of disciples has been growing in numbers and popularity, and Jesus is clearly going places as the leader. And they're now on their way to Jerusalem, where things are very likely to come to a head. And James and John want to get in an early word about being Jesus's right-hand men, or as they put it, his right and his left-hand man. And they probably think they deserve this because they have been part of Jesus's inner circle. They have been the ones, along with Peter, who accompany Jesus at very significant moments. They were there when Jesus brings the daughter of Jairus, the synagogue ruler, back to life. And they are there when Jesus is transfigured, when he appears to them all in glory. And so being part of this inner circle has given them an idea about how important they are. But Jesus says to them, "You don't know what you are asking. Can you really go through everything that I am going to go through?" And they say, "Oh, yes, of course, we certainly can." And Jesus says, "Well, all right then, if that's what you want. But actually, it's not up to me to hand out positions in my kingdom. So you'll just have to take your chances with everyone else." And this isn't quite the answer they'd been hoping for, but on the other hand, that seems to be the end of the discussion. What I find interesting about James and John is that the way they behave is not so unusual. You still see concern for status and power in many Christian groups today. Let me give you one example. I used to know a lady who was a church warden, and she'd been a church warden for a number of years because this was back in the days when you could hold on to that position for as long as you wanted, as long as people voted you in. And probably when she'd started being church warden, she'd been very good at it and she had organised people well and helped things to run smoothly. But over time, she had developed all sorts of little rules of her own. And they were rules on things such as where the servers should stand and when they should bow, and how the lesson was to be read, and how processions were to be organised, and how the collection was to be taken, and how it was to be counted. And she had a notebook, and she sat at the back of the church with her notebook, and she would write in it anything that she saw happening during a service which she considered to be wrong. And then when the service was over, she'd find the person who had committed the offence and make sure they knew all about it. Not only was she the vicar's right-hand woman, and it goes without saying that the vicar was terrified of her, she was also in that church acting as if she was God's right-hand woman. It's just that she made it hell for everyone else. Now, this is an extreme example, but I wonder if there's something in all of us which hankers after a bit of power and a bit of influence, because they do make you feel good about yourself. When I became a reader 30 years ago, I wasn't so much motivated by having robes to wear, because I always worried a bit about falling over them. And I wasn't so bothered about being in a procession or sitting at the front of church, nice though these things are. What I really wanted to do was make my voice heard. I was in a church where the vicar and the ministry team consistently ignored me because I was too young and inexperienced, and I was indeed too young and inexperienced. But I thought, I'll show them. I'll find a role which will give me power. But I soon realised that becoming a reader was not it. Being a reader made no difference at all. I ended up feeling aggrieved that still no one took any notice of what I thought. And this became a real distraction. I reckon that I was as deluded about having power as were James and John. Now let's just look at Jesus' response to all this. Jesus calls the disciples together and talks about power in his kingdom. Whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Now this doesn't really make sense, because no one is good to other people because they are hoping that it will make them powerful. No one helps others because they think it's going to make them important. What Jesus is saying is that the values of this world are completely at odds with the values of his kingdom. Desiring power as the world understands it has nothing to do with following him. He, after all, did not come to earth to acquire power for himself. He came for a completely different reason, and that reason was love. He came to serve others because of love. He was prepared to suffer persecution and torture and death because of love. He came to show people the way that they can draw closer to God so they can experience his love for themselves. Following him has nothing to do with being successful or holding positions of power. It has everything to do with love. Occasionally I think back to that church warden, and I hope that underneath all her desire for power and control, there was a glimmer of understanding that she was loved by God. And I hope that there was too some possibility that she was able to respond. And for us, along with all the many reasons we may have for being in church, I hope that the love of God, his for us and ours for him, is ultimately what draws us. And I pray that his love will keep on drawing us, now and for the rest of our lives. Amen.